Today we finish up our exploration of Buddhist and Hindu art by looking at how Buddhist art, and for that matter Buddhism itself, evolved as it moved east to China, Tibet, and Japan. Alert! This is a repeated ECB favorite topic, in part because it offers such a great example of both continuity and change. Buddhism spread across northern India and into Central Asia and China along the Silk Road, a caravan route that brought silks and other Chinese trade goods such as glass, lacquer, and ceramics west of the Roman Empire and later Christian Europe, and also introduced Greco-Roman art to parts of Asia. Around this time, Buddhism also diverged into two separate paths. Theravada Buddhism roughly translates into the lesser vehicle, but it really involves a greater focus on individual spirituality. This form of Buddhism would travel south into what today is Sri Lanka and then into Southeast Asia, especially Thailand. But a new branch of Buddhism began to develop in Gandhara. Remember those Bamiyan Buddhas? This new branch of Buddhism was known as the Mahayana, or greater vehicle. It's also known as the Bodhisattva vehicle because Buddhists in this tradition began to venerate bodhisattvas. This shift in emphasis reflected a new focus on communal enlightenment and even communal salvation. So what are bodhisattvas? They're enlightened beings who choose not to enter nirvana, but instead stay in the world to help others achieve enlightenment. Because bodhisattvas have a worldly mission, they're often dressed ornately in aristocratic clothing, as you can see in these images from Gandhara. We should also note the Hellenistic Roman influence in the drapery and curly hair. As Buddhism moved east into China along the Silk Road, it was this more theistic and more communal Mahayana form of Buddhism that took hold. Buddhism, as it happened, faced some pretty serious obstacles in China, obstacles that the Mahayana form of Buddhism more easily overcame. First, the Chinese had no tradition of samsara, so a religion focused on overcoming the burden of continuous reincarnation just didn't resonate with the Chinese. Moreover, Confucian society was focused on social relationships, not individual self-realization. It was very hierarchical, and to the extent that it looked to past lives, it looked not to earlier incarnation, but rather to ancestors. Mahayana Buddhism, with its emphasis on an essentially patriarchal set of bodhisattvas and a much more hierarchical paradise, simply proved more compatible with Chinese culture. Buddhism also benefited in China, as it had in India, from political and social upheaval. The Han Dynasty ruled China from around 200 BCE to 200 CE, a time basically along with the Roman Empire. During the Han Dynasty, Confucian philosophy dominated China, and a stable hierarchical society enjoyed considerable prosperity. But this fell apart for 3.5 centuries as China was divided into competing states. The non-Han Chinese emperors of one of these states, the Northern Wei, adopted Buddhism as their state religion. When the Tang Dynasty reunified much of China in around 600 CE, its emperors also adopted Buddhism and made it a state religion. The most famous Buddhist art from this period, and today's first recorded work, is this monumental cave sculpture. Let's watch a video clip from the Asian Art Museum that looks at this and other Buddhist cave art. So here are two of our 3 recorded images, the guardian figures of the third. The Longmen cave complex was built largely in the 5th century CE at Luang in northern central China, the city where, according to either history or legend, Buddhism first arrived in China. These caves contain more than 100,000 Buddhist stone statues, more than 60 stupas, and 2,800 inscriptions carved on stelas. The central Buddha we see in this cave is the Cosmic Buddha, or Vairocana Buddha, the Buddha of boundless time and space. On either side of the Buddha we see bodhisattvas and other guardian figures. We also see an arhat. The name of this particular cave makes reference to honoring ancestors, and it's thought that the emperor and his wife Later Empress Wu Zetian had it carved in part to honor their ancestors, a sign that Chinese Buddhism was accommodating Confucian beliefs. While there is some dispute about this, historical records suggest that the Vairocana Buddha was modeled after the face of Empress Wu Zetian, the only empress in Chinese history. Wu Zetian began her imperial career as a concubine to a Tang emperor, then later married his favorite son. When the son, Emperor Guozong, suffered a stroke, Wu at first ruled behind the scenes, and then she declared herself Empress of China. The empress used Buddhism to bolster her reign. People believe that the emperor's power was given by God. Aware of this, that's the mandate of heaven, which I'm sure you talked about in ancient Civ. Aware of this, Wu decided to promote Buddhism as the favored state religion. Not a surprising move, given that Confucian beliefs did not permit female rulers. Wu helped to translate Buddhist scriptures that would help support her rule, and she used her own money to build Buddhist shrines and temples, including this one. She invited Buddhist scholars to China, and she treated the monks with great respect. In return, no surprise, Buddhist monks declared that the gods had bestowed power on her. Remind you of anyone we've already encountered who also used art to promote her own importance and to overcome opposition to female leadership? How about Hatshepsut? This is the last of the recorded Longmen cave images, and it's my personal favorite. Only the figure on the right shows up in the College Board image, by the way, but I wanted you to see both since they're clearly a pair. So how would you contrast these statues of guardian figures with the Vairocana Buddha on the right? The guardian figures are clearly much more dynamic. They're really action figures. Their faces are fierce, in contrast with the serene Empress Buddha. They also have highly defined musculature. Check out the abs on the guy on the right. The College Board must like these guardian figures. They also appear in the required images for the Todaiji Temple in Japan, which we'll get to in a few minutes. Some scholars think that these guardian figures, which are a fixture in Buddhist temples throughout East Asia, actually evolved from statues of Heracles. Heracles was used in Greco-Buddhist art to represent Vajrapani, one of the earliest Bodhisattvas to appear in Mahayana Buddhism. So, check out this 2nd century Gandharan statue of Vajrapani, right next to Heracles. These guardian figures are most commonly referred to by their Japanese names, Neo. According to Buddhist tradition, they traveled with Siddhartha Gautama to protect him. Within the generally pacifist tradition of Buddhism, stories of these guardian bodhisattvas help justify the use of physical force to protect cherished values and beliefs against evil, and maybe to protect empire rulers as well. You can see how this might appeal to emperors, both Chinese and Japanese, who used Buddhism to support their rule, but also needed to protect and expand their empires through warfare. Note that in both pairs of statues, one figure has a wide open mouth and the other has a more closed mouth. Again, according to tradition, they are actually mouthing the Sanskrit words that symbolize birth and death. We'll take another look at the Japanese version, but for now, let's move on to Tibet. This was among the last Asian lands to come into contact with Buddhism. Buddhism arrived from India in the 7th century CE, when a Tibetan king invited 2 Buddhist masters to Tibet. As with the Northern Wei and Tang dynasties in China, the king was hoping that Buddhism would help unify his kingdom by creating a common religion among the people. But if Buddhism came late to Tibet, nowhere else did it become more central to national and cultural identity. Nowhere else did it take this kind of root. Tibetan Buddhism also developed some unique features, most of which I, alas, don't have time to discuss, but I do want to mention Tibetan Buddhism's greater emphasis on the importance of the Lama, or spiritual leader. Over the centuries, lamas played increasingly important roles in Tibet, not just as religious figures, but also as political leaders. At various points in Tibet's history, a lama actually led the government. Here we see the Potala Palace, which was constructed in the 17th century by the great 5th Dalai Lama. It was built to represent the sacred Mount Potala, the home of the Bodhisattva of compassion. Each Dalai Lama is said to be a reincarnation of this Bodhisattva. Potala, which is both a monastery and a fortress, was the seat of the Dalai Lamas until the communist takeover in 1959. The Jokhang Temple is the holiest site in Tibetan Buddhism and the site for the installation of each new Dalai Lama. In the front of the temple, there's a large plaza and an open porch where Tibetan pilgrims prostrate themselves. The most devout pilgrims cover the last several miles, prostrating themselves continuously on the ground. Many pilgrims bring offerings to the chapels that ring the shrine or leave scarves outside in the open porch. So let's watch a short excerpt from a Buddhist-made documentary about the palace and the temple. Note, by the way, that this documentary takes the traditional Buddhist view that this statue was created during the young Siddhartha Gautama's lifetime. Your Khan Academy experts present a contrasting view. Jokhang's interior is a dark and atmospheric labyrinth of chapels dedicated to various gods and bodhisattvas. The cloister leads to the central hall, which contains Jokhang Temple's star attraction, the Jowo Rinpoche. This lifestyle-sized statue of the Buddha at age 12 is the holiest object in Tibet. Tibetan Buddhists believe that this image was crafted during the Buddha's actual lifetime by a celestial artist with the guidance of the god Indra. Tibetans seek to pray to the statue before they die, since they believe that its energy will transform them and help them at the time of death. Often when Tibetans become sick or die, their relatives offer gold to this statue. The gold is directly applied to the face and body as an offering to the Buddha. A sick or dead person's name is written in gold on red paper and then is burned in front of the statue in a lamp. The current and 14th Dalai Lama has lived in exile since 1959, but is still acknowledged by Tibetans both within and outside the country as their nation's spiritual leader. Okay, we're going to close our whirlwind tour of Buddhist art in Japan. Shinto, not Buddhism, was the earliest religion of Japan, and it persists in some forms into the present day. Most Shinto deities are local, and many are associated with agricultural seasons, planting, growing, harvesting. They also tend to be associated with specific clans and their ancestors. This focus on nature would carry into Japanese Buddhism, especially Zen Buddhism. Buddhism arrived in Japan from China and Korea around 700 CE, at a time when the court of the Japanese emperor was increasingly adopting Chinese customs and culture. Japanese emperors also hoped to use Buddhism as a unifying force at a time when the empire was threatened by civil war. In 720 CE, the emperor moved his capital to Nara. During the so-called Nara period, Buddhism became a national religion, and the Japanese aristocracy increasingly adopted the cultural values of China. So, this is perhaps the most famous of Japan's Buddhist temples. It's built in the traditional pagoda structure that traveled to Japan from Buddhist China. This image hall, or kondo, is one of the largest wooden buildings in the world, and it has been rebuilt several times after fire and earthquake partly destroyed it. The original building was even larger and even more magnificent. The temple houses the world's largest bronze statue of the Buddha, standing almost 50 feet tall. This is another Buddha Vairocana, the celestial cosmic Buddha who lives in nirvana. Building this gargantuan Vairocana Buddha required thousands of craftsmen. It also used up all of the copper in Japan, and that almost bankrupted the state it was designed to protect. The copper was gilded when gold was discovered in Japan about the time the statue was being completed. The all-pervasive power of the Vairocana Buddha gained extra significance when the emperor proclaimed that his ancestor, the great Shinto sun deity Amaterasu, had revealed to him that she and the Buddha were one. Here again we see Buddhism merging with older traditions and accommodating local traditions. Which mudra do you see? His hand is raised in the do not fear mudra, especially appropriate for protection. Over the following centuries, the power of the emperor and the imperial court gradually declined and passed to military clans and their armies of samurai warriors. One of these warriors seized power in 1185. He moved the capital from Nara to Kamakura, just south of Tokyo. He took the title of shogun, which literally means general. This gateway was built in 1199 as part of a reconstruction of the monastery after the Civil War and following a revival of Buddhism at Nara that was promoted by the shogun. Note the imposing size and the strong, severe lines, typical of the style of the militaristic shogunate. These guardian figures were erected at the gate, and they were created at the same time. The Nio, as they are known in Japan, are traditionally named Agyo, the open-mouthed statue representing the beginning of the universe, and closed-mouthed Ungyo, representing its end. Once again, we see the warrior spirit of this new regime. Look at those fiercely glowering eyes, tense muscles, and swirling draperies. Do not mess with the shogun, and do not mess with the shogun's guardians. These huge sculptures were designed and created under the supervision of the leading sculptor of the shogunate, Unkei. His workshop was known as the Kei School. The statues were built around a core of 10 massive timbers bound together. The statues have more than 3,000 parts held together with large posts or iron clamps and nails. The outer skin was covered with a mixture of linen and lacquer and then painted. The samurai rulers who took over in Japan were also Buddhists, but they followed a different school of Buddhism, Zen in Japanese. Samurai were drawn to Zen Buddhism's focus on finding inner peace and enlightenment through meditation and self-denial. Samurai followed a code called Bushido, which taught followers to embrace the possibility of death at any moment. Zen Buddhism taught samurai practitioners to clear their minds of all thoughts before battle, helping them overcome fear and distraction. So, where did the Zen Buddhist warrior or monk go to clear his mind? To the most famous form of Zen Buddhist art, the garden. Let's take one last quick video tour, this one courtesy of Khan Academy. We didn't assign this one as homework, but we saved it for class. The Ryoanji Dry Garden is about the size of a tennis court and composed solely of 15 large and small rocks, some encircled by moss, grouped in 5 clusters on a bed of carefully raked white sand. From a distance, the rocks resemble islands, and the sand a tranquil sea. As the video and your reading pointed out, it is impossible for we, the unenlightened, to see more than 14 of the 15 rocks at any given time, and that was quite deliberate. Zen monks led austere lives in their quest for the attainment of enlightenment. In addition to daily meditation, they engaged in manual labor to provide for themselves and to maintain the temple properties. Many Zen temples constructed dry landscape courtyard gardens, not for strolling, but for contemplative viewing. Cleaning and maintaining these gardens, that means pulling weeds, tweaking unruly shoots, raking the gravel, was a kind of active meditation. Another popular garden style was the promenade garden, which was designed to capture, if also improve upon, nature. Japanese Zen gardens used borrowed scenery, the Japanese term is shake, to strengthen the feng shui or spiritual forces contained within the land. We'll see this emphasis in Chinese and Japanese landscape painting as well in a later unit. Because Kyoto is bordered on the west, north, and east by low but very visible mountains, borrowed scenery was easily incorporated into garden images. This plan of the garden is the third required image. I've added a labeled image from the internet to make it clearer. Note that the complex includes several other temples and gardens. And we've run out of time. We will now move to the third great religious tradition that we will consider in this unit, the faith and art